So it's 4:30, and tell me who you're here to see. Who? All right. Is that what's on the schedule? So who should we get? Well, you would think, right? The universe is a mystery place, and Los Angeles is where we make adventure movies. So what did we bring you? We like to think of it as Jono Plus. It's Jono with an adventure story in which Jono may or may not be here. Because if we knew Jono was going to be here, there would be no drama. If we knew Jono could not be here, there would be no drama. But as of literally 30 seconds ago, we don't know if we're going to have Jono.
Where's Jono?
Well, that's a good question. Now, you'd think that's kind of relevant, isn't it?
I think a Skype call is in order.
See, that's what I wanted. And he's telling me he left his GoPro at home, but if he goes back to get it, then that whole thing starts. Well, but then we got to find route. But if we did it next time, then that would require planning and there wouldn't be drama. There was a plane issue is what it boils down to. When you let me know, the plane was just taking off. He was keeping me up to date every minute while the plane was in the air. The plane landed. I got word. A few minutes ago, he said his Uber driver picked him up, and the Uber driver, in LA. Well, here's the best part. His Uber driver, when he picked him up, said, "Oh, I think we can do that in about 20 minutes." And Jono, not being local, said, I think he said 20 minutes, and texted me, my Uber driver said 20 minutes, which we know to correct as 3 hours, but
What airport?
Yes.
it is legal,
Bob Hope.
not driving, but yes.
Burbank.
So,
Yeah.
the bottom line is this. We had a good time with Q&A before. We had a little break. We're back. We can continue that conversation. Jono may join us. Jono may not join us.
Right.
Jono's Uber driver might join us instead. We don't know. I'm getting updates by the minute. We'll keep you informed. Take it away.
Okay, so
There's one comment. It's 16.2 miles, 28 minutes.
oh sure, why not? It could happen. Yeah. Well, and of course, Jono's talk was lessons learned from Ubuntu, and I think I can sum it up. If he can get here, he can elaborate. But I think what we really learned from Ubuntu was how to love. So there's that. But yeah, he may get here. Fingers crossed. We'll see. Until then, it is Q&A time, and so we had such a good time. We have more people here, which is great because not that we're here for Q&A, but we have a great time in Q&A because you can ask any Ubuntu-related question you want. You can ask any question you can sort of try and spin as Ubuntu-related, and we will give you an answer. It may not be the right answer to your exact question, but we will definitely give you an answer. And this is just kind of a fun time to ask whatever is going on. And sometimes we have audience members who know the answer when we don't, and we welcome that too, because Ubuntu is all about community and working together, and so that's just as fun. So I think it's time to open up to the audience. Your burning, urgent Ubuntu questions, and also, are you going to mic run, or are you going to? It's so rude to be on your phone.
I'm trying to.
The Scale AV hates when I'm holding two mics. I think point them at each other. They're the best mic win. Your question.
When does 18?
Maybe not. You do have to eat the mic, but the also.
So when does 1804 come out?
Ubuntu 18.04 will be released on April 26th, 2018, and once April 26th, 2018 UTC, midnight rolls over, every time somebody asks that, they delay the release by 15 minutes. So,
So when does 1804?
yeah. If you're running Ubuntu 17.10, you'll have an update prompt basically right away. And if you're running 16.04, you won't get prompted until 18.04.1 comes out in July, mid-July. So You can force it, but otherwise, no big first-day bug surprises when on your LTS upgrade. So, yep. And then there's a question back there. This is a good deal for me. He's the one on the bike all the time, and I'm the one that needs to exercise, and he's running. It's excellent.
Why is MariaDB in the universe repository, not main?
That's a fantastic question. That is a good question, actually. I'm not sure. So MariaDB should be a complete drop-in replacement for MySQL. I don't know why. Who here is from Canonical this weekend? I can harass about that. Now I want to know. Because, why is MariaDB in universe and not main?
Maria's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That's a very good question.
Because I run Nextcloud and I would like to use the better, less evil database. So, of course, when I use databases, they're all evil when I'm having to support them. So, matter of opinion, yes.
Mine's related more towards networking. The fact that IF up-down being deprecated for, I forget what the name is for the new convention. Why is that being deprecated?
That's a good question. Apparently, it's been decided upstream that the old ways were horrible and wrong and outdated, and we can do better. And every so often, with free software, with technology, they say, well, let's do things better. And yeah, the networking in the last year or so has been one where like, you know what was wrong with networking all these years is having short, identifiable, readable names for all interfaces. What if they were automatically generated based on the MAC address and unpronounceable and 64 characters long? If you're running cloud stuff, to be able to do that, to have automatically generated names that don't change, because if you swap PCI cards, which is not a thing anymore, suddenly your interfaces change. So uniquely identifiable interface name is sometimes a good thing. And so speaking of networking and transportation, fantastic. You're gonna want to get the mic back.
Now the drama's over.
I know.
This was neck and neck. Now we know you're going to be here.
Yeah. Jono, I told him the lesson we learned from Linux was how to love. So.
Thank you.
Do you want us to stall for another 5 minutes while you boot up?
Sorry?
You want to stall for another 5 minutes while you boot up, or are you running?
Yeah, just give me one
Okay.
second. Plug in.
Are you running Gentoo?
Yeah.
There was a question over here, I think. Yes.
So how do you manage conflict in the community?
How do we manage conflict in the community? I almost feel like I want to give this to Jono, but basically, since I am a member of the local community council, it's tricky. What you have to do is you have to, the Ubuntu has a code of conduct that governs how we treat each other. And so it means that we be respectful is one of the biggest things. And what we want to do is we try to talk to each other with an open mind. And when that doesn't happen, often there's a governing body, there's you're working on a subsystem and there's someone kind of in charge. Or if you're in a loco team and you can't, the loco team members can't decide on something, there's a conflict, they can escalate to the local community council. We can, there's a community council on top of that. The local community groups, loco for short because we're crazy about Ubuntu, are groups of Ubuntu enthusiasts and advocates throughout different countries. In the US, it's per state, so Ubuntu California is here today manning the booth and running everything, and the president of Ubuntu California, and Liz is a member, and John is a member, and Richard's a member. So if people in California work at an event and had disagreements, they could come to me and myself and everyone. We'd say, well, we tried this, tried that. If that didn't work, they could go to the local community council. And I would recuse myself, it was a California thing. And then there's a community council for community things. For technical things, there's a technical board in the Ubuntu project. Mark Shuttleworth's title is self-appointed benevolent dictator for life, and so he can also kind of step in and soothe things. In the end, we always want to assume good intentions and just try and hear each other out and see how that goes. So, all set?
I think so.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your patience, and to great excitement and no further ado, I'd like to introduce Jono Bacon.
Alrighty. Thank you, everybody. My apologies for being late. I hate being late anywhere. Somewhat hilariously, I had a flight that was delayed, so I rebooked onto the earlier flight, and then that was delayed to the same time as the delayed flight. So this has not been a good day for traveling. All right, so first of all, thank you, everybody, for coming to the UbuCon. It's great to see so many friendly faces here as well, and so many new faces. So back in 2006, I joined Canonical, where I joined as the Ubuntu Community Manager. And this kind of launched, I think, one of the most interesting phases of my career, for sure. Back then, I'd spent a couple of years working and, thank you, Richard, and experimenting in open source. What I didn't realize was the journey that was about to happen. So I'm actually going to play you a short video. I know that we haven't rigged any audio up to this, so I'm going to put the microphone in front of it. But this is actually a little video that one of my colleagues, Robbie Williamson at Canonical, produced, and I think it really kind of encapsulated the sense of what Ubuntu was all about. So this gives you a sense of the journey that preceded. Anyone remember any of the pieces in that video? It's like 1,000 memories crammed into that video. For me, it was, the 8 years that I was at Canonical was, thank you, Matt, were just an incredible time. And what I wanted to go through here was to just kind of share some of the lessons that I learned over that time that have been particularly relevant since I've become a consultant and worked with a number of other different companies. So when I was at Canonical, it's by no means was me. We had a team of people, and it became a bit of a common theme that we took these horrible boy band shots, like this. I'm not going to deny that I was absolutely driving this. This was actually a shot of the team. This was taken on my last day at Canonical in Malta, just before I left, and this was a pretty nerve-wracking time for me because I basically grew up kind of in this position. When I started out there, I was very new at this, and I thought I had a sense of what I was doing, but I really didn't. Here we can see some members of the team as well as some members of the community who were as close a knit part of the team as the guys who worked for me, who were paid by Canonical. It was a real sense of team spirit. We looked after each other when people got stressed. We wrapped around each other like a glove. It was a pretty remarkable time. So first of all, I want to get into some of these lessons. There's hundreds of lessons that I took while I was there, while I was participating in Ubuntu and at Canonical. So this is just a snapshot of some of them that I think have resonated most with me and my experience. The first thing is you miss every shot you don't take. And this, for me, started out right at the beginning. In 2005, I was at Guadec in Stuttgart, and I was hanging out with the GNOME community, and this guy walks in. And first thing I thought was, look at that haircut, right? I still think the same thing, it turns out. I'm just envious, honestly. So he walked in, and I had a meeting with him, and I was, at the time, a really enthusiastic Ubuntu user. This was very early, of course, in the evolution of the Ubuntu project, because a good friend of mine called Scott James Remnant and this other guy, Jeff Waugh, were very involved in the first stages of Canonical, and they'd kind of clued me into some of this stuff that was happening. But it's one thing to be excited about a project. It's another thing to go to a multimillionaire and ask him for a job. And when I heard about this Ubuntu Community Manager position, which had just kind of sprung up, I'd never seen the term Community Manager ever. I'd never seen it anywhere. And the first thing I thought was like, I know I can do this job, but I'm probably not going to get it. There's already some members of the Ubuntu community. I've never worked for a distributor before. Like, why should he give it to me? I had the most awkward job interview in his kitchen. That's a story for in the bar. But you know, the thing I think Ubuntu has taught us is that showed us with open source is that if you don't have a go, then you'll never succeed. And I think the Ubuntu story has been littered with examples where at the beginning somebody said, "You're crazy." You know, like $12.7 million for a crowdfunding campaign is ridiculous, right? To try and raise $32 million, we had to go at it. And we got most of the way there. So have a go at it. And that's something that's definitely followed into my career, is that if you don't have a go, you will miss every single shot, okay? So, and I think this was not just, this didn't just resonate for me in my career, but has also resonated, I think, throughout open source as well. The second thing here is that diversity of participation is important. I remember when I joined, one of the things that I really wanted to do, my main mission with Ubuntu, was to diversify the types of participation. Back in 2006 when I joined, Linux was a place where, you know, generally to be successful you had to be A, a man, and B, a programmer. And when I started at Canonical, I really wanted to make sure that the Ubuntu project was a place where so many different people from different backgrounds were able to participate. Now, I'm not going to claim for any second that I am a diversity guru, right? I was as equally unaware of the importance of diversity, particularly in terms of gender diversity back then, as I think a lot of people were. And that's something that, of course, has come later in technology's evolution. But at the time, one thing that was very important to me was diversity of participation. Not just programming, but documentation and advocacy and testing and all these different ways that people could participate. What drove me to pursue this was that I'm basically a bit of a crap programmer, you know? I have a go at it, and I can write a bit of Python code, but my code is pretty terrible. So this was completely self-serving, that I wanted to make sure that more people like me could participate, because there's lots of us out there. And a good example of this, actually, was a project which I kicked off in sort of 2012 sort of time, I think it was, 2013, called Ubuntu Accomplishments, which was a gamification platform for Ubuntu. It was kind of just an idea that my best friend and I started kicking around and playing with. And what I loved about this is that I wrote a chunk of the code, about 2 other people wrote a chunk of the code, but, you know, people did artwork and people did translations and testing. And, you know, I remember this client, I put it into Launchpad, and 24 hours later it was translated into 12 languages. Just as one tiny example. A lot of open source projects, I don't think, look at it from this angle. I think there's such a focus on developers, particularly in a lot of modern open source projects, that we sometimes forget that translations and testing and all kinds of other things are critical. So not just diversity of gender, sexuality, religion, all that kind of stuff, but also diversity of participation and collaboration. Now, the third thing is, one of the things that, you know, I think when we look, in the future, when we look back in the history books at Ubuntu, one of the things I'm most proud of is that I think the notion of a release cadence came out. And the person I credit this to is Mark Shuttleworth. You know, he was hell-bent from day one that we are going to release every 6 months, regular as clockwork. Now, of course, that wasn't a new concept. Debian had a certain level of release cadence. Some other distributions were playing with it as well. Some other projects had done this. But in Ubuntu, we said, Every release comes out, every 6 months, and then part of that 6-month release cadence means that at the beginning of the release, you're planning. You know that there's an Ubuntu Developer Summit coming up. You're putting your blueprints into Launchpad. You know that there's going to be various string freezes and QA freezes and all these different regular points in the timeline. And the reason why I think this is powerful is for two reasons. One is that it gets people into the same mental mindset of where we are in the life cycle of a piece of software. This has become particularly relevant since I've become a consultant, where I work with lots of different companies around how they implement community strategy. And one of the big challenges with community strategies, you can do a million different things. You can do blogging and meetups and social media. You can build on-ramps for your community. You can do all kinds of stuff. How do you pick the right things and make sure you ship stuff? And boiling that down into a release cycle means that you're able to optimize it. The release cycle itself becomes as much of a project as the project itself. So in Ubuntu, what we would end up doing is we'd have a release cycle, we'd execute in it. Some stuff will go well, some stuff will go less well, and then we would optimize it. Okay, well, maybe we need to adjust these different deadline dates. Maybe we need to provide a little bit more time at UDS. There's all these different optimizations that we made to how we work together. And everybody who was part of that process could feed into that as well. So the way in which we work together, to me, is as much of a product as the actual thing you're building. And that to me, was a really insightful thing at the time, which I had no idea about. To me, it was just normal. Yeah, that's how we do it. It wasn't until I came out of Canonical that I really realized how unnormal this was. As a small example, one of the benefits of this is that when you start planning a bunch of work into a release cycle, it means you can start generating things like burn down charts, which is where you can basically say, we've got all this stuff to do. Are we going to make regular progress on these different things to accomplish to get to our deadline? And what I loved about this was that people in the community would feed into this just as much as my team would. In fact, there was more work going on in the community than my team was doing in many cases. And this was broken out across many different teams. And, the thing about workflow is that it's imperfect. There's never going to be a workflow that's perfect for everybody. So there's always opportunities for refinement, seeing data, experimenting, and then improving. And I think that was a really, really powerful lesson that's really shaped the rest of my career, and I think can shape a lot of open source projects. Now, another thing here is that I really learned a lot about was the importance of on-ramps and what I would call enablement. And I don't mean hardware enablement in this context. What I mean is every one of you sat here at one point was new. And some of you will be new right now. And you'll think, I'd like to participate in Ubuntu or another project, whatever it might be. In my mind, the way I tend to think of it is that to be successful in the community, that person needs to go from being new and then getting to creating something of value for either them, that's both valuable for themselves and for the project. It's not just important to generate value for Ubuntu. It's important that you can derive a sense of personal value as well, whether it's satisfaction, whether it's helping your career, whether it's increasing your skills, whatever it might be. To go from not knowing how to do something to know how to do something is what I would call an on-ramp. And the on-ramps vary generally depending on different types of participation. So for example, I've talked about this in some of my previous talks, so some of you will have heard me blather on about this previously, but for example, for developers, typically I tend to think of it as the first bit is you need to discover how to participate. Secondly, you need to set up a tool chain. Thirdly, you need to be able to learn the skills to participate, such as using documentation and training. Then you need to be able to find something to do. Then you need to be able to get help. And then you need to be able to have your contribution reviewed. And then you need to feel a sense of validation, that the work that you did, if it was good, was appreciated. Steps 1 and 7 on that on-ramp are always the same. It's always discover and validate, because that's how we build a sense of belonging in communities, which to me is the most important thing we should be focusing on. So when I was at Canonical and when we were working on Ubuntu, this was always at the forefront of my mind. I consistently beat myself up that it was way too hard to contribute to Ubuntu. It would drive me nuts, and I'd rant and rave at my team about, people would come up to me and say, you know what, I tried to contribute to this particular project, but it took 2 hours to get the tool chain set up. Or The worst thing for me was, a merge, merge review has been sat. My merge proposal has been sat there for a week. It's like, this is crazy. So looking at how we optimize that is, I think, essential. And so many open source projects don't do this, right? Don't look at how to do this. Like, to me, what you do is you put your brain into incognito mode, and you look at the world from the perspective of a new contributor, and try to throw away all assumption and see what you can do to optimize those different pieces. It reminds me a little bit of a really close friend of mine, and I'm really into smoking barbecue. And one of the things they say in barbecue is always write down what you did in a cook, because then when you do something that works, you can go and see what you did, and you can learn from it. And I thought, I'm not going to use a pen. It's ridiculous. First of all, my handwriting's terrible. So I built a web app. And the reason why I got into smoking was because it was time away from a computer. It was, fire, like an analog medium. And then I ended up spending more time writing barbecue pad than actually smoking, which is the way it tends to work. So him and I kind of, we've had so many of these little projects before, and we came up with an idea with how it was actually quite a complicated workflow, because we wanted to make this ultimately flexible. And we thought it was genius, and it would work really well. And then we did some user testing. We actually asked people to do a cook and use it, and it was a complete disaster. It turns out that when we were trying to put ourselves in the minds of our users, and we had no idea what was going on. So this is, I think, really, 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 really important. This is actually where a chunk of my team's focus got sank into developer.ubuntu.com. It was, how do we provide an environment that gets people up and running, elegantly, quickly, and easily? This actually relates to another lesson that I learned as well, is there is a very different relationship that you have, I think, between people who contribute to the core of an open source project and people who build apps on top of it, right? So people who contribute to Ubuntu care about how it's governed, the licensing, they care about the culture, they care about the politics, right? And so much of the discussion, but also so much of the noise was wrapped up in our community, was wrapped up in the operational dynamics of how this project was running. One of the things I've learned is that people who write apps for platforms don't care about any of that stuff. They just want documentation that works, an SDK that you can build software with, and the ability to get your software out to people. So when we started working on the Ubuntu for Devices app developer strategy, I actually explicitly didn't want to focus this on the existing community, because I saw it was almost two different demographics. So that's one of the reasons why when we built this, we actually built this from the perspective that you don't have to care about, you don't have to care about the latest flame war going on a mailing list. You just have to care about getting software, having great documentation, and building great apps. All right, I'm going to try and get through these as quickly as I can, because I think questions are more important than me ranting on about stuff. Expectations are important and often poorly communicated. This is, again, something that is... One of the things I've learned as I get older is there are so many things, there are so many future insights in your life that are already in your brain, but you need to put yourself in a different scenario to unlock them. It's kind of like a horrible video game. And one of the things I've learned from working as a consultant is that the expectations of your stakeholders, you have to manage them effectively. And we always kind of knew this when we were doing this in Ubuntu. And we obviously had very, very explicit stakeholders, right? I mean, an obvious one is Mark Shuttleworth, right? He's an opinionated guy. He knows what he wants, and he will tell you what he wants. So his communication, his expectations, you'd think, weren't poorly communicated. They were loudly communicated, but they were sometimes poorly communicated. And that's not his fault, because a lot of people, whatever they say they want, one of the things I've learned is it often isn't what they actually want. So for example, some of my clients that I've worked with, I'll talk to them and I'll say, what do you want? And all of them will say, I want growth. I want a big community wrapped around my product or my service, or whatever we're building the community around. But when I delve into it, often what they actually want is validation in the market, more customers, brand recognition, any of those types of things. It often isn't just growth. So one of the things I've learned is that particularly for those of you who are working on an open source project that's got a company attached to it, or if you work for a founder, is going through the process of understanding expectations is really important, because it gives you two things. First of all, it actually gives you a sense of what the goal should be and what the deliverables should be. But secondly, is that if you do it well and you write it down and you agree it and you go through a process of kind of like understanding, documenting, reviewing, then what happens is when that person changes their mind 1,000 times, you can say, okay, we can change your mind, but if we can't do this, if you want to do this, then we can't do this. So you're going to have to make a decision. We can't do both. And that was where I think that is where I think so many companies get stuck, is that there are stakeholders who want to do everything and you can't do everything, and it kind of gets embroiled in this kind of lack of communication. So going through an explicit expectation, setting expectations and requirements gathering, I think is really important. Number 6, scale is tough. I don't mean the conference. The conference is very easy, okay? This is literally the only place you can make a joke about that like that. This was something that, again, like when you, without turning this into an autobiography, like when I look back on my time at Canonical, the thing that I think I internally wrestled with more than anything was how to deal with scale. The early stages of the community and the company started looking like this. This was in Mountain View. Then it started growing. This was in Spain, I think it was. Started growing more. This was in Budapest. This is in Orlando. More and more people. This was in Copenhagen. I'm not in that picture because my son was being born. More and more people were joining. We had over 1 million people on the forum. We had hundreds of developers. A constant microscope on the work that everybody in the project was doing. And of course, that hasn't stopped to this day. Ubuntu is a powerhouse in technology. And it can be difficult to know how to manage that. The thing that I wrestled with repeatedly was, how do we build scale but keep the personality of the project? Because that's what got me excited about Ubuntu when I started out, was it wasn't just an open source project. I didn't just get a website with an on-ramp where I can, know the steps to go through and know where to submit the pull request and know how it gets reviewed, and you get your little icon in the corner of the website. I didn't want Ubuntu to become that. I wanted Ubuntu to retain the character. Like this, the thing I love about this is that when all of us are in the bar tonight or in a restaurant tonight or just hanging out with our friends tonight, we'll talk about certain people. There's certain characters in the Ubuntu world that many of us will know. Like Corey Berger, Jeff Spalletta, Benjamin Mako Hill, Richard Stallman. He's a fan. But those characters, I think, they shape the community. They give it life. They give it character. And as you grow, it can be increasingly difficult to kind of maintain that character. And one of the things I've learned since I left Canonical has been the only way to accomplish that is to be explicit in how you react to scale. Not the conference. Is that you have to build, for all intents and purposes, mentoring programs where people can guide people to be successful, but you have to have places for the community to be social with each other. One of the things that I think was a great financial decision, but a poor community decision, was when we moved away from in-person UDSs. This was a victim of scale. The early days, when my first Ubuntu Developer Summit in Mountain View, there was like 80 people there. We could all fit in a restaurant. The last Ubuntu Developer Summit that I went to, there was about 800 people there. So it got too big. They became too expensive, and I think Canonical made the right decision as a startup to try to move that to an online setting. But it had a pretty detrimental impact on that character of the community, because so much of that was just meeting people in person and hugging each other and all the rest of it. So scale is tough, but I think you can do a lot by being intentional in the way you address it. 7. I think it's 12, so we're nearly there. Most people need direction, but they don't necessarily need options. There's kind of a misnomer, I think, in the open source world that it's all about choice. This is the reason why we've got 600 Linux desktops. I don't think people actually necessarily want choice, and choice is a burden, right? You need to know your options. If you want to, anyone who's built a PC knows what I'm talking about, where you have to pick which RAM you want, which processor you want, all the rest of it. So there's the offshoot of this, I think, is that what happens is you say to people, here's all of these ways in which you can participate. Here's all these ways in which you can join our project and be successful. And then what happens is they don't actually make a decision. They don't participate because they don't know where to start, and they feel a bit unusual about volunteering. The thing that I've learned, and you've got to be a little bit kind of forward about this, is if you go up to someone and say, hey, would you mind doing this? 9 times out of 10, they'll say yes. Unless it's, like money laundering. People don't usually like that sort of thing. So when you start a community, and I think when you continue in a community, making decisions about, okay, well, we think we want to do this, want to move in this particular direction, and then saying, all right, Jane, will you do this? All right, Bob, will you do this? All right, Indu, will you do this? You'll actually get people to say yes, and then if you ask those folks to commit to those actions in a public setting, then they'll usually end up getting done. We used to do this a lot, again, at the Ubuntu Developer Summits, where we'd have all of these sessions, and one of the things I used to go on and on about in my intros at the Ubuntu Developer Summit was get actions written down. Don't just go and sit down and have a nice chat, right? Let's do something. Like, this is a limited opportunity. We're face to face. Let's make something happen. And a lot of those sessions that I was in, at least, and I know other people in the community, the end of it was someone saying, okay, this sounds great. Will you do this? Okay. Will you do this? Okay. Will you do this? Okay. And the burn down chart gets filled. So, be intentional. 8, well-focused work can deliver great results. So, when we started the Ubuntu devices strategy, I'll always remember flying to Budapest. I just moved to California, and I realized how far California is from Budapest. I spent 2 days traveling, and I got there, and my beautiful new wife is at home, so I don't particularly want to be away from home, but I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. I get in on Sunday evening, run in kind of like how I did just now. Mark Shuttleworth comes up to me and he says, we're going to initiative, which was we had a bunch of people do some designs. The design team approved them at Canonical. And then we went out to people and we asked them if they wanted to write these apps and have early access to this SDK. I'd never seen this model done anywhere else. And what blew me away is that it worked. People started building apps. This is actually Deco, so this was kind of out of it, but we got this incredible group of people. We'd fly them out to sprints, and they did a ton of work. And all of that was based upon trust. No one else had access to this SDK. This could have been a terrible idea, a terrible waste of their time. But I think when you intentionally say, we want to accomplish this and go after it, it's amazing what people will do. If I think there is a really good sense of kind of equity in the community, that people feel part of that. My goal with this, and I asked David Pinella, who when I quit Canonical, he ended up replacing me. I asked him, to run this project, and he did a great job. And the thing I said to him was like, we have to make all of these folks feel like they're as valued and as participated in as any Canonical employee, because this was before all of this had kind of gone live and public with the broader community. 9, change in habits take time. General scientific thinking is that it takes 66 days to develop a habit, which is actually a really useful metric if you want to get anyone to kind of build a habit in anything, whether it's not smoking or whether it's going to a forum every day. But change is tough. And one of the things we went through, of course, with Ubuntu was Unity. Bit controversial at the time. And the idea here, I thought, was a wise one. So it all started off with this thing, Notify OSD. Anyone remember this? Yeah. Michael Hall definitely remembers it at the back. The idea was like, let's just make something and see if there's an interesting kind of like bringing it into the community and people participate and all the rest of it. And there was the usual level of kind of like, is this some way of Canonical kind of stealing all of our project and this, that, and the other? And I think we tried to temper that as best as we could and tried to be as collaborative as possible. This was based upon like a KDE spec. This was all built on. We tried to work with KDE and GNOME around this. The next thing that came in, remember this? Messaging menu, of course. The early version, this was awful. It got much better in later years. And the indicators. I'll always remember, of course, back then, if you clicked on an indicator and you moved your mouse, it wouldn't move to the next indicator. Whereas with this, you could do this on your indicators. And I remember sitting there just watching it go over and over again. My wife was like, "What is wrong with you? You're crazy." But it was like these things that bugged us forever. We started focusing on, and then of course the desktop piece started coming, and then of course we had the dash and all these different components. And I, at the time, genuinely thought the way in which we were going about this was the best that we could do with the goal to differentiate, right? The reason why Unity happened was so Ubuntu could differentiate from other distros, right? Because in the earlier days of Ubuntu, the only differentiation we really had was A, hardware worked. With a lot of other distros, it just didn't work. And B, you got the cool stuff earlier. But the nature of a competitive landscape is that your competitors are going to get better, right? So I think in the early stages of Ubuntu, and this is no disrespect to the other distros, but Ubuntu was just categorically, scientifically better than Fedora. It was better than Debian. It was better than SUSE. It was just better. But as Ubuntu kind of got older, these other distros really got their game going, right? They were shipping the hot new stuff earlier and earlier and earlier as well. And for a company behind it, you have to kind of differentiate in a way, and Unity was kind of an effort to do that, but to still collaborate and participate with the broader community. At the time, I don't think I'd ever seen this kind of model applied, and I think there were certain things we did that worked well, and there were certain things that we did that really didn't work well. And the thing I'm happy about is that we've got like some case law on the things you should and shouldn't do. But at the heart of this, a lot of this was about change. And I think some people in our community had very valid concerns about the implementation and the approach and stuff like that. But I think there were certain people like, change is bad. I don't want this because it's different. And that's a hard thing with communities. It's hard to pivot because you cannot let those people win. You cannot let people tie you to the past and never change and never improve, because what will happen is you will stagnate. And we've seen many open source projects suffer from this. So I'm proud of the effort, but there's definitely things we could have done better. But again, I think being intentional about change is really important. Like sometimes not changing things is actually a good idea, right? If it isn't broken, don't fix it. So, but with something as contemporary and as wide-ranging as Ubuntu, we really had to kind of evolve it and keep moving it forward. 10, code is an artifact of community. There is a massive misconception in the open source world that it's all about source code. And I don't think it is. I think source code is the tangible evidence that a community is working, or that the collaborative piece of a community is working. There are many communities that write code that actually have pretty broken communities, I think. But, as we've seen various examples of, you have to it's important to, well, put it this way, you can write code and have a crap community that no one wants to participate in. But if you build a really solid community, you will by definition get a good product out the end of it because it's well structured. So to me, a lot of this is about, again, being intentional in strategy. Now, obviously, I'm biased. This has become my life, my career. Like, every element of how we build communities is fascinating to me. And I think we have to be intentional. But a lot of communities just kind of rock up and say, well, let's have a go at this. Let's just install a discourse instance, and we'll register a GitHub account, and off we go. And if you do that, unless you are lucky, in many cases that will fail. This is one of the reasons why the majority of repos in GitHub and GitLab are empty, right? It's the same with every platform. You'll always have a small group of users that will do great stuff, and the broader range will do less great stuff or no stuff at all. So it's important to be intentional for us to get that quality up. 11. The biggest ideas can be carefully managed. What I mean by this is sometimes you have a Mark Shuttleworth say we're going to hire 150 people and build a devices strategy, and the first thing you think is, yeah, right? There's kind of a lot to take on. But I think even the biggest goals, the biggest ideas, and we see this more and more, I think you can say, let's take this, let's break it down into smaller pieces, let's understand those pieces and be intentional in how we tackle them, right? And this is, I think, really important, particularly if you work professionally in open source or in communities where it's only a matter of time before you have a CEO or somebody else is going to come and say, we're going to do this giant big thing, and the first thing you think is, I don't want to do that because it's too big. But actually, we can break these things down into smaller pieces and manage them. I'm a huge Iron Maiden fan, and Iron Maiden have these enormous arena shows all over the world. They hire a jumbo jet, they take half the seats out, they put all the gear in the back, and the lead singer of Iron Maiden flies the plane, right? It's nuts. And their manager of 35 years, Rod Smallwood, was once interviewed, and they said, how do you pull off this incredible elaborate, this elaborate tour with all of the logistics and the visas and the band and all the rest of it? And he was like, make a plan and stick to it. That was his response. And the making the plan bit is easy. Just sticking to it is the hard thing. And it's as simple as that in my mind. Everything can be broken down into smaller pieces, whether it's something like this, the devices thing, or whether it can be something like the Ubuntu Edge. That was so much fun, the Ubuntu Edge. I think I've got a prototype in my kitchen drawer still, actually. It doesn't work. It's just a brick. And then number 12. You can think you know it all, and you don't. And this is again, a somewhat personal one. When I was kind of getting to the point of leaving Canonical, because I was just ready for something new, I didn't think I knew it all, but I felt like I had a reasonably good handle on how you build communities. I'd written a book, organize a conference, do a bunch of talks all over the place. I felt comfortable in my expertise, let me put it that way, but still a lot to learn. Having been out of Canonical now for 4 years, I think it is, 4 years, when I think about what I knew when I left, because it's like a milestone in my life, it is just mind-blowing to me how little I knew back then compared to what I've learned in the last 4 years from working at GitHub and XPRIZE and consulting and meeting people at conferences and all the rest of it. I think it can be so easy to suggest you think you've got a handle on something, whether it's community, whether it's software engineering, whether it's something else. And it's amazing to realize just how much more learning there is to do. And for me, that's the biggest thrill. This is, without sounding like a cheesy self-help thing, one of the things I love is when you realize you've been doing it wrong. When you say, like, why was I doing it that way? There's a way more efficient way in which I could have accomplished the same results. To give you a tiny example from my business, I used to retain clients on a daily basis. So I'd be retained with a client for like 2 days a week, 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, for example. And I took on a bunch of clients, and I was struggling a little bit because I was like, okay, well, I'm retained for these clients, but what if someone wants to have coffee on a Wednesday, and I'm retained for a client all day on Wednesday? I can't do it. So every lunch break, I was meeting people, and I was doing calls in the evenings, so I didn't have this conflict. And then I was actually in a pub one night with a friend, and he just said, well, why aren't you on like a normal retainer? I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, they book you for a certain number of hours during the month, and those hours can be utilized whenever during the month, and then they can have access to you whenever they need it, and then it completely frees up your calendar. Seems like a good idea. Made the change, infinitely happier. And I love moments like that because it's like, I think too many people dwell on, oh, well, I screwed up, I made a poor choice. But there's so much opportunity for us to make improvements, to change, and to grow. And I think when you can be in a position where you're doing this every day, where you're always learning new ways to look at the world, and that's one of the things I love about open source, is there's always a new way to look at something. There's always a lesson that can be learned. Like I talked earlier on about Unity. Did we make some mistakes? Of course we did. But at least we can look on those mistakes and learn from them. And I think that's a pretty good situation. So that's everything I have. I think we have a few minutes left. Any questions? This shifty-looking individual at the front. I know him, by the way. I'm not just being mean to a random guy. So I will repeat the question, and most of you probably aren't going to this is a bit of an in-joke. So the question is, how many, I'll translate, you said tomatoes. Tomatoes. How many tomatoes does somebody have to eat at a conference? Whenever we did an Ubuntu Developer Summit, one of the standard slides I always used to have was something that said, don't drink too much, eat healthily, get some exercise. Like, take care of yourself this week, because at the end of the week, everybody got something called Ubu flu, which was, someone from some far-flung corner of the world brought something to the event and everyone got sick. And so this was kind of like, it became a bit of a running joke about, eat a vegetable. And the irony of this is in the 12 Ubuntu Summits that we did, I didn't give one of those slides when I wasn't hungover. Complete hypocrite. So, yeah, it is the way it is. So, yeah, any other questions? And by the way, I'm unoffendable, so if you want to ask something hard, go for it. Michael Hall puts his hand up immediately. Favorite moment at Canonical? God, I don't know. So many favorite moments. Canonical was the best job I've ever had, by miles. It was so much fun. And as you know, Mike, because Mike used to work there as well, it was the people that made it. I think, I actually don't know, there's so many. Yeah, I'm genuinely struggling to think of, there's loads of it. Like, the one thing I'll never forget was in Budapest, we had a Friday night jam session. We did this on the last night of every Ubuntu Developer Summit. And everybody being crammed into this little club, and everybody just dancing and having fun and watching, like, people were translating Ubuntu into Bulgarian, dancing with the CEO of Canonical, and Mark Shuttleworth awkwardly singing "Come On Baby Light My Fire" on stage. Things like that. There was like real social moments like that I think were really cool. The one thing I loved as well was just walking into places like airports and seeing broken airport monitors running on Ubuntu. That always kind of give me a kind of a boost. One thing that was kind of funny as well, I'll always remember, was I was actually consulting with Deutsche Bank on the side, and I got bumped up to first class. I'd never flown first class before. So I was, like taking pictures and sending it to my wife. And, there's some guy on the flight walks on, has got like the first class jersey on. He's very proud to be flying first class. And I was thinking, oh, what a pathetic human being. Opens up his laptop, Ubuntu. It's like, misjudged. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I have to say, the political communities I've not really spent a huge amount of time with. I mean, I've seen great work that other people are doing. But I think I think there's two comments in my mind on this. A somewhat abstracted response is, I think a lot of the consistent things that we do in successful communities can be applied in a multitude of different areas, which is what I think is so neat about this, is, you know, make a plan, stick to it, make it easy for people to participate, build, you know, social connections between your members. You know, I think giving people a mission, I think, is the most important thing. Where I think it would tie with the political realm is, I think one of the reasons why Ubuntu was so successful and continues to be so successful is because it really just rallied this kind of like energy in so many different people. That's the reason why I got into it. And it reminded me, when I first saw Ubuntu, it reminded me of Firefox when that first kind of came out, and people were like making crop circles and, you know, things like that with, you know, to promote it. So I think having a mission is so important, and that's where projects like Ubuntu and certain political communities have a benefit, is that it's easy to rally people around something because it's often an emotive thing. Like, a lot of people in this room who are interested in Ubuntu will do it because of software freedom and ethics. Like, it's the right thing to do. One of the things I've discovered, I mean, obviously you can see I'm running a Mac. One of the things I learned was that for me, it's actually the community collaboration piece is actually more important to me than the software, which is the reason why I don't mind running a Mac. But the collaboration between people and doing it in an open and transparent way is non-negotiable. Now, if you're a company and you're trying to make a community of people who are enthusiastic about wire wool products, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So I think political communities can almost certainly look at many of the similar patterns in open source communities and vice versa. The other thing as well, which I would just make one comment on, is one of the things I think is a problem in communities, and we're seeing this in our current political landscape, is the growing inability for people to have differing views and have a respectful conversation. And one of the things, we had our, you know, dirty laundry in the Ubuntu community, but by and large, people were always very respectful with each other. People who you'd radically disagree with could sit down and have a civil conversation. Not necessarily like each other, but just have a civil conversation. I worry about the political discourse that we're seeing, you know, where people can't seem to actually debate seemingly complex issues in a simple way, I guess is what I'd say. Yeah. What is Canonical's biggest challenge moving forward? That's a great question. It's not profitability, because Canonical is doing well. I think the tricky thing that Canonical's got moving forward is the main area where I would say Canonical are playing these days is in the cloud and the infrastructure world. I mean, there's still a lot of work going on, for sure, in like Snappy and desktop snaps and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's teams of people working at Canonical and that stuff, but I think when you look at a lot of the work that's happening, it's around the infrastructure, you know, the keynotes, a lot of the messaging is around the infrastructure side of things. I think one of the tricky things that Canonical's got to wrestle with a little bit is that I think a lot of people associate Canonical as an operating system company, the company that builds Ubuntu, even though Canonical builds a bunch of other stuff as well. And I think operating systems have become a less central role in infrastructure these days with containerization. Like an operating system is a thing that lives inside of a container. Whereas, you know, when we started out with Ubuntu, an operating system was one of the most fundamental technology decisions that you make. And I don't see that as a technology problem for Canonical. I see it as a marketing problem. And every company has this at some point where the hot new stuff becomes less hot because there's other things that they're working on. You know, I don't have any concerns really about Canonical in terms of execution and delivery. You know, there are things that Canonical's working on that I agree with and some things that I disagree with. But Canonical continues to hire really good people. And I think Mark has still got like a really exciting and inventive vision. But I think the race is on to make sure that Canonical continues to position itself as a very relevant organization, which it is. There's no ambiguity around that, you know. So, yep. That's a really great question. So just to repeat it for everybody, there is a bit of a stigma that Linux desktop, it used to be a bit broken, and maybe it's still broken, but it's actually a very, comprehensive and compelling technology. How do we get over that stigma? I think it depends somewhat on your goal. Again, comparing it a little bit to when I was at Canonical, the reason why I was personally, like many other people, working ludicrous days on Ubuntu was because I thought this is our shot to take on Microsoft and Apple, to be like as valid as Kubernetes is today and Linux is today on the infrastructure world on the desktop. And I think if that commercialization goal is the goal, it's going to be hard because the hard bit is not the technology. Like Linux desktops are great, right? I think the Linux desktop landscape today is better than it's ever been. When I think of the work that is going on in Ubuntu with Fedora, the folks at Endless with Endless OS, I mean, it's amazing it's amazing how elegant and how sophisticated desktop Linux is today. But the hard bit is the distribution, right? It's getting it out to people in products that they can use. It's crossing that chasm, and with relative exceptions such as Endless, I'm not convinced that that's going to happen anytime soon. I feel like we had our shot. Now that I might be wrong. I'm historically wrong about these sorts of things, so I don't want to demotivate anybody. However, if the goal that you're looking at is an awesome operating system that people like us, who go to Scale every year, care about and love and participate in and have fun with, I'm more interested in that, personally. I don't particularly care about Linux dominating the commercial world on the desktop anymore. I care more that my buds can use it, and that kids in Indonesia can use Endless OS, and people in developing countries can have access to information that they never could have previously, and stuff like that. So honestly, it sounds like a bit of an arrogant answer, but I kind of think people who think that stigma are idiots. I don't really care what they think. So the people who I care about already understand desktop Linux, and I think it'll continue to grow. I actually like the fact I prefer where we are now. I think we're in a good space. So I'm not sure how much time I've got. Oh, I'm over. All right, I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Scale.
So I want to thank you all again for coming to UBCon at Scale. It was a lot of fun, a lot of challenging, and although it was unplanned, it looks like everything from planning to execution was last minute today. So thank you for your patience, your good humor, your camaraderie, and we hope that we see you not only having fun out on the Scale Expo floor this weekend, but also if you drop by the Ubuntu booth and say hi, we'd love that too. So I think the expo floor is open for another 25 minutes. Go have fun, have a great dinner. I think there's a happy hour thing. Check your schedule, and get some sleep so you can enjoy the expo floor tomorrow. Thanks for everything.
And for those of you who like to travel, there are UbuCons around the world. So drop by ubucon.org. And as you have suggestions for next year here, drop us a note there, and you can tell us what will happen here next year. We'll see you then.